Hey guys, Aaron Cybertron Zhang here, and today we start our coverage of the Crown Tundra. More specifically, the Series 7 rule set for VGC 2020 came out just a couple of days ago, so I wanted to make a quick overview video to get you up to speed with the format, let you know what Pokemon I expect to see in the early metagame, and just give you some of my overall general thoughts on the format. Now, of course, Series 7 won't go into effect until about a week from now, so it's still pretty early, but I know a lot of you are already hungry to start building for the series and just want some starting point and some reference material. So I hope you find this video helpful. I spent a lot of time making it, but I'm eager to dive into just more guides for this DLC, and obviously VGC is going to look very, very different now. And so, yeah, thanks as always for watching, for supporting the channel. One thing that I quickly want to note is that I will be covering all of the Pokemon that you can get via the DLC, so if you don't want to be spoiled by that, I'd advise that you come back later. Just wanted to have that disclaimer before we get started. There are also timestamps in the description below, so if you're only interested in certain portions, feel free to follow along. I created some reference graphics that I think may be helpful, so those are referenced in the description below in the times. So, first of all, a quick summary of the rules. Series 7 is going to start on November 1st and it ends on January 31st. As you can see, that's actually 3 months, so it's a little bit longer than the previous series that we've had. That's not super surprising though, I think, and I'm really interested in seeing what Series 8 will be like once we finish with Series 7. That being said, obviously, that's still way down the road. All the Pokemon from Series 5 are legal, and Series 5 basically encompasses everything that was allowed in VGC 2020, so your Togekisses, your Whimsicots, your Cinderaces, your Dusclopses, anything that you trained in Series 5 or just throughout VGC 2020 is going to be allowed. Most of the new Pokemon in Crown Tundra and Pokemon Home are going to be allowed as well, with some exceptions. So first of all, the cover legendaries, these are typically the mascots of the games, like Kyogre and Yveltal, are banned, and mythical Pokemon, which have historically been banned in VGC, are also not going to be allowed, Pokemon like Mew and Jirachi. If you're curious on what Pokemon that encompasses from Sword and Shield, I've listed them in that bullet point. That means that all the other Pokemon, like Tapu Koko, like Landorus, like the Ultra Beasts, are going to be allowed, and that does include the new Regis, the new Birds, and the new Horses as well. The previous rules are still in effect, so things that you're used to in VGC, like the item clause, like the 20-minute battle timer, like the 7 minutes your time, are still the exact same. So basically, we just have a brand new list of Pokemon that will be joining what we were using previously. I found the rule set on Pokemon Home, quite frankly, to be pretty confusing and very text-heavy. To me, it was a little bit confusing that they didn't just list out the Pokemon that weren't allowed, so I created 2 graphics in the following slides just so that it's a little bit easier to follow along. Now, if you want the exact text for what Pokemon are eligible and which ones aren't, I mean, this is directly taken from Pokemon Home, with credit to Victory Road for originally taking the screenshot, but I found this to be just really confusing, quite frankly. So, here is a list of all the new legal additions after Series 5 that you can use following the DLC. So, covers a bunch of Pokemon like I mentioned previously, the legendary trios like the Birds, like Tornadus, Landorus, and Thundurus, like the Tapus, like the Ultra Beasts, for example, and some of the brand new additions from Sword and Shield as well. So out of these, these are only the fully evolved versions, obviously, by the way, but, encompasses their pre-evolved versions as well. These are basically all the new Pokemon that you should expect to see potentially in competitive play. Obviously, the legendaries are the ones that really, really stand out, but some other ones that I think have a lot of potential include Pokemon like the Nidokings, or Nidoking and Nidoqueen, Aerodactyl, Salamence, Metagross. Those are just a couple that are kind of on my radar, as well as Dragonite, actually, as well. So I'll get into that a little bit more later on, but yeah, if you want to know what Pokemon you can use, these are all it. And these are all the brand new ones. And subsequently, these are all the Pokemon that are banned from Series 7. This shouldn't really be too surprising to anyone. It's basically like everything that was banned in 2018 plus the Sword and Shield edition. So if you've played VGC before, it's basically like the same concept. And so, yeah, nothing too crazy here. But if you're curious on whether or not you're allowed to use certain Pokemon, you can use the 2 graphics here to judge whether or not something should be legal. This, by the way, the ban list is actually on Cerebi as well. I've linked that in the description below, so if you want to follow along with that, feel free to, just to have a text version as well. So, I know that Series 7 looks very, very different from Series 1 through 6, and if you're feeling lost, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling confused, the first thing I want to say is don't worry. So am I, and so are a lot of other players. That being said, a brand new metagame is always kind of challenging, especially when, we haven't played with a lot of these Pokemon in a Dynamax format before, so it's going to be even crazier. So don't worry, it is definitely overwhelming, and I think it takes time for everyone to adjust. The first couple of weeks are always super crazy, super hectic, but I just want you to know that, like, if you feel lost, no worries. So do a lot of other people, including myself, and I'm going to do my best to provide you guys the content so that you can at least, feel a little bit more comfortable and, can learn the format through this channel. So my first expectation is that I think this metagame is going to be a little bit more slow-paced, especially from, like, maybe Series 6, where we had a lot of Tailwind Talonflame teams, for example. And one of the main reasons for that is because I think a lot of the new additions, especially the legendary Pokemon, are really quite bulky. So one thing that's really interesting, in VGC, especially this year, is that, with Dynamax as a factor now, one thing that can really make teams or individual Pokemon stand out is if it can thrive both as a Dynamax Mon and as a non-Dynamax Mon. A lot of these Pokemon are some of these legendaries, and so for that reason, I think it'll slow down the format a little bit. A lot of these old legendaries are actually also really good as non-Dynamax options, and some of them are even maybe better as a non-Dynamax option. So Pokemon that I thought of that are great both as max and non-max are Pokemon like Tapu Fini, Tornadus. Actually, I shouldn't say max and non-max. I would say a lot of these are actually better as non-max options. So Fini, Tornadus, Cresselia, for example, I think are all really good supportive options. They could definitely Dynamax. I could definitely see people running a weakness policy on a lot of these, Pokemon as well. But I think they thrive especially as non-max options. Heatran's an interesting one where I think it's both pretty good at non-Dynamax and Dynamaxed. In general, I think the best teams, as always, are going to have multiple Dynamax threats. That's kind of been a trend that we've seen throughout VGC 2020. That being said, I think the early meta teams are definitely going to kind of focus on enabling 1 to 2 major Pokemon. That's just kind of how people team build in early metas, where you really try to, find one really big Pokemon that can kind of just beat everything. And so earlier on, I think, in team preview, I would probably be able to expect to call out like the main Pokemon I expect to Dynamax. That's obviously not going to be the case for all teams, but that's just kind of an early prediction that I have. I also think that you should expect to see people try out all the new legendary Pokemon from Sword and Shield. Obviously, anytime you get brand new Pokemon, people are excited to try them out. Now, I don't know which ones are going to be really good, which ones are going to be bad, which ones are going to be mediocre. I have some predictions, but that being said, I think regardless of whether they're good or not, people are going to at least try them out. So in terms of the format overall, I'm pretty excited for it. I know that a lot of people really liked VGC 2020, especially because of the exclusion of legendary Pokemon, and trust me, I really enjoyed 2020, especially Series 6 as well, in terms of at least just making competitive content. But I do think that this will be a really interesting format, and I do think that, fortunately, a lot of these big legendary Pokemon are pretty balanced as well. And so with Dynamax being a thing as well, I think a lot of, Pokemon that maybe couldn't stand up to these big legendary Pokemon previously now have a lot more potential. In terms of Pokemon that I am personally intrigued by and want to explore in the early meta, I'm looking at Regieleki, some of the brand new birds and the new horses, the Ultra Beasts, and then some certain specific Pokemon that I'd like to try out are like Weakness Policy Metagross, Weakness Policy Dragonite, Tailwind, Tornadus, and Weather still seems to be really solid in the format as well. So these are just a couple of things that I'm personally interested in. The reason I'm telling you this is so that you can maybe have some ideas of what to build in, or just like how I'm kind of approaching this early format. So those are some of my very early thoughts and expectations. Obviously, things are going to change, especially once we actually start playing Series 7 in-game, but just wanted to give you my personal thoughts and impressions. So now I want to quickly cover some Pokemon that you should expect to see, both from before the DLC and after the DLC. This list should not be surprising to any of you. I mean, this is basically, it's very close to like what the top 12 Pokemon in terms of usage were in Series 5, right? So none of this should be too crazy, but I do think that a lot of players are still opting for these options in Series 7. I'd say, obviously you have some really incredible support options in Pokemon like Incineroar, Amoonguss, Whimsicott, Dusclops, P2. Togekiss is interesting, where, throughout VGC 2020, a lot of players like to Dynamax it, but then a lot of players also use it as a supportive option. I think it'll probably kind of fall out a little bit, especially because there are a lot of brand new Steel types that can give it trouble, but I still expect it to stick around. And then finally, you've got some really good heavy offense options from Pokemon like Dragapult, Cinderace, and Urshifu. Expect that to still be the case. Rillaboom works as general utility and support. And then Tyranitar, Primarina are still just pretty darn good sweepers, especially when Dynamaxed. So none of this should be too surprising. That being said, I think you still have to prepare for all of these Pokemon. I think especially the major Dynamax threats in the Dragapult and the Cinderace on this list. But overall, I think all of these Pokemon need to be respected when you're team building for Series 7, and early meta trends imply that players are still really opting for a lot of these Pokemon. In terms of brand new Pokemon after the DLC that you should expect to see, this is just a list of 15 Pokemon. There's obviously a lot more than this, but these are just like the 15 that or at least a list of 15 that I see a lot of players opting for just in these opening weeks. And so none of this should be really too surprising. Obviously, Landorus-T is back in the format. I know a lot of people have been freaking out about Landorus-T. I know it's been used a lot in VGC. I do think that it is, I mean, it's still really, really strong, especially in a max format where it can Airstream or Quake, for example. But, you know, I do think that it's like, definitely answerable, and it's not like overpowered to the point where every team needs to run one and like it's just going to completely sweep through everything. At least that's my early meta impression, but it's still a really strong option, obviously, with Intimidate. Tornadus offers a new means of speed control. That obviously is really strong with Tailwind. It's like what we saw with Whimsicott, for example, or Talonflame. But Tornadus can also have some really, really good firepower from its attacks as well, and get some good utility moves. So Tornadus is interesting. Way back in the day, it was used very offensively, and then it became more kind of defensive Pokemon. And if you're interested in, you know, like what kind of Tornadus that you should run, you know, I think looking at some VGC 2019 teams is interesting, where it was more utility based with maybe one offensive attack. Tornadus typically carry one offensive attack. The Tapus are all returning. You'll notice that I did not include Tapu Bulu here, and that's because Rillaboom, I think, just kind of outclasses Bulu now. You could still use Bulu to some extent, but I think these three will be a lot more common. Heatran and Cresselia have been staples for almost a decade in VGC. Expect that to continue to return. And there are 3 Steel-type Ultra Beasts in Kartana, Celesteela, and Stakataka. Steel-typing was really, really incredible in Series, you know, 1 through 5, right? Or I should say 1 through 6. And that's because, like, Max Steel Spike itself is a really strong attack. Not many Pokemon resist that. But giving yourself defense boost is really good, and a lot of these Pokemon, after a Steel Spike boost, it can be very difficult to KO, especially like Stakataka and the Celesteela, for example. So I think all of these are really viable options. You know, they were proven to be good options pre-VGC 2020, and now that they can potentially Dynamax, I think, you know, definitely should expect to see them as well. I also have listed here Metagross, Regieleki, one of the horses, and 2 of the Galarian Birds. And so, you know, a lot of these are new Pokemon, obviously, like I mentioned, that people are interested in trying out. These are just the ones that I've seen being used more often than not currently, but I think all the new legendaries are viable to their own extent as people try to figure out what works or not. So just because I didn't include something here doesn't mean that I think it's bad. This list is just what I've seen people trend to, at least in the first couple of days. And you'll notice that there's one non-legendary Pokemon here in Metagross. I think Metagross is an absolute monster in this format because of its incredible bulk, incredible offensive move pool, and just a great Dynamax candidate, while also thriving as a non-Dynamax Pokemon. So I think you should definitely keep your eyes out for that. It's going to be everywhere, at least in my opinion, in the opening weeks. So if you have, like, no idea where to start, I think this at least is a decent reference point in terms of just, like, big Dynamax Pokemon that can be really good support Pokemon, and a bunch of means of speed control. Obviously, this is not close to an exhaustive list, but I wanted to just create kind of this chart so that you could have some idea of how teams are going to be, you know, composed, right? I think often you'll see a combination, maybe, like, and, you know, if I were to expand this list and categorize every single Pokemon in the format under one of these 3, I think generally you're going to have a couple Dynamax threats, a couple of support Pokemon, and then a couple means of speed control. These are just a couple of ones that I've seen established in the early meta that you will definitely be seeing in your battles. So, you know, under Dynamax threats, I just talked about Metagross pretty extensively, talked about Landorus previously as well. I think Dragapult's still really good just because of its incredible speed stat, so you still have to give a lot of respect to it because it's just, like, as we saw throughout VGC 2020, it's one of those Dynamax options that can really just win games quickly if people are not adequately prepared. Cinderace is kind of like that, you know, to a lesser extent as well. Obviously has an incredible ability, a little bit slower, but also still really strong. Kartana is a Dynamax threat that I think could be really strong, you know, just deep move pool, throw an Assault Vest on that, and it's really difficult to KO, actually. On the defensive side, even on the special defense side, if you're not using, like, a Fire-type attack, will be able to last around for a while. In terms of general support, none of these should really be too surprising. I mean, Fini and Sonora Mungus have been staples for so many years now in VGC, and they continue to be, I think, really good as support mons. I added Comfey here because I think a lot of players, especially as you saw throughout like Series 5 and Series 6, kind of like weakness policy-oriented strategies with Comfey, and Comfey does enable a bunch of new policy strats as well on something like Dragonite, for example. So, you know, Comfey is an option. It's not, like, super meta, but it does enable a lot of really powerful Pokemon, and it's something that I think can be really good as a general support mon. In terms of speed control, this list isn't close to being exhaustive. I mean, you could throw in, like, Cresselia and Dusclops for Trick Room options, for example, but these are just a couple that I've seen players tend to in the earlier weeks. Tornadus offers a brand new Tailwind option, which is really interesting. Whimsicott, obviously, has Fairy coverage. And the new Reggie is really interesting because it has an incredible base speed stat, and you also get Electro Web. So kind of like how we saw some players use Choice Scarf, Electro Web, Rotom Wash in, the last couple of weeks pre-Series 7, I think, Regieleki can kind of have a similar role where you don't even have to invest in speed and you can just, Electro Web things and enable a Pokemon to Dynamax and just outspeed and sweep on turn 1. So that's a potential lead combination or just a lead Pokemon you should expect to see. And Porygon 2 comes back as a Trick Room user. Trick Room's been really interesting. With Dynamax now, I think Trick Room is, or whoever is using Trick Room, you have to try to not get KO'd on turn 1. Pokemon like Dusclops or Cresselia, for example, are really solid Trick Room options, but they're also weak to, say, Max Phantasm from Dragapult. So it means that you would either need a redirection user, but Porygon 2 is kind of one of the few Pokemon that really, it's like nearly impossible to get a one-hit KO on. And so for that reason, I think a lot of players will still trend to this for Trick Room, but it's not the only Trick Room user by any means. Obviously use Dusclops, Cresselia, Hatterene, or, one of the many Trick Room options out there. But I think P2 is one that people will at least kind of think about earlier on. This is just a list of a bunch of new early meta combos that I expect players to use, at least in the first couple of weeks. Whether they're good or not is kind of to be determined, but I think these just popped up in my head for things that you might want to be prepared for. So I've talked about the Regi a lot at this point. Obviously, Tapu Koko was a natural partner for it to enable its terrain. The combination of terrain plus its ability plus attacks like Electro Ball or Rising Voltage are just really, really powerful. Obviously, this is very reliant on electric type attacks. So a ground type Pokemon, for example, like Landorus, can wall something like this, but I think it's a duel that you at least should maybe expect for, earlier on. I also saw a really interesting Colossal combination of Blacephalon plus Colossal, because now you can use Blacephalon's signature attack to enable Steam Engine on Colossal. So something like Scarf Blacephalon into like a Life Orb Colossal, for example, was a duo. Like I said, once again, whether this is going to be strong or not is to be determined, but it's at least something that I've seen people use, and I think it's, a really fun idea that I definitely want to kind of try out as well. We saw how good Colossal could potentially be towards the end of VGC 2020, especially with it winning the first Players' Cup. So it's a Pokemon that has a lot of potential, and most people have relied solely on enabling, weakness policy plus Steam Engine, but now with Blacephalon, you have a new way to enable Steam Engine, which is pretty cool. One combo that I've also been seeing a little bit of is like Tornadus Metagross, or just a general way to enable Weakness Policy Metagross. So I think Weakness Policy Metagross is one of the biggest Dynamax threats in this format, at least early on. There are a lot of ways you can enable Weakness Policy, for example, Bulldoze, Brutal Swing. We've seen a lot of those strats, throughout VGC 2020, and so, for example, Arcanine Metagross is another duel you could go with as well. Anything that gets access to Brutal Swing or Bulldoze can enable Policy Metagross, and of course you can use something like in self-target Metagross as well, like a Shadow Sneak user. So Metagross, due to its typing, actually, there are a lot of ways to enable that policy right from turn 1, so I think that's definitely something you should expect to see. And I think out of all these duos, like Metagross plus a Weakness Policy Enabler is probably going to be the biggest one that will be sustainable throughout the course of this season. That's just my early prediction, at least. So, in general, first thing that I want to refer you to, there's 3 different resources: Pikalytics.com, Babiri.net, and the VGC subreddit. Pikalytics is great because it basically aggregates the most used Pokemon and gives you breakdowns and statistics on what Pokemon people are using. And it gives you kind of a high-level summary in terms of like what natures, what EVs, what moves, what items that certain Pokemon are running. So as people begin to play online and in-game, you will be able to kind of see how the metagame shapes up. Babiri.net is a really cool resource where basically it aggregates like top teams and links potential replays if they are saved for those teams as well. So if you go to Babiri.net, you can see what people are playing with on Showdown, and you can see potential battles as well, and you get to see like what the high elo players are basically using. Now, obviously, the rule set has only been out for a couple of days, so right now, there's still a lot of variability, but I think these are 2 resources that you should use no matter what series, no matter what VGC format we're playing in. They are both excellent resources. I also mentioned the VGC subreddit, and Aaron Trailer posted a really, really good post earlier today that I've linked in the description below, just to give you some general guidelines on how to approach team building in this format. I think one thing that's really important to hammer down through this video is that it is so early on in the format. Like I mentioned, if you are uncomfortable, if you don't know what to use, do not worry, because that is the case for so many different people. So if I could give you a piece of advice, especially in this early meta, try out a lot of different things. Try out whatever strategies you're interested in. Right now, there's no established metagame whatsoever, and things will change, you know, obviously, as people continue to play this meta and as it continues to progresses. But, you know, right now, I think it's really chaotic, it's really open, and so you should just try out whatever you're interested in, see if it works or not. If it doesn't work, then ask yourself, why didn't it work? Are there ways I can improve it, or is it just not good enough to beat the top Pokemon that I'm going up against? I think, you know, a lot of people, often when team building, you want to start with an individual Pokemon or a sweeper, and I do think, even though, yes, there are a lot of legendary Pokemon that have now returned, I think in a Dynamax format, a lot of Pokemon, or really any Pokemon, is still viable if you build around it properly. So, for example, if you want to just try out whatever Pokemon that you're really interested in, you don't know how to make it work, try to create a weakness policy-oriented strategy around it. At least that's my first point of advice. I think Dynamax weakness policy Pokemon is viable in anything in this format, so that's just kind of one direction I would guide you in. If you don't know where to start, like I mentioned, Pikalytics and Babiri.net can give you a lot of good insight on what people are trying and what people are using, but I also think that you can use VGC 2018 or even earlier 2020 as a reference point to see what worked previously, what cores were dominant, what Pokemon synergized naturally with each other, and then draw inspiration from that. So, for example, in 2018, Tapu Fini and Metagross Landorus was a really common core. I actually think that's a really phenomenal core right now in this format as well, especially because you have two Dynamax threats in the Landorus and the Metagross, and you have great general utility, mixed between special and physical. If you were to use that core, I'd probably throw in more special attackers, but, you know, you get the gist here. And then another example of a core that kind of comes from previous years is like, or this year, I should say, is actually the Sun core, right? So like Charizard, Torkoal, Venusaur. Now Stack Attack is back in the format. I've seen that thrown on with Sun a bunch as well, so you can throw that on as a Trick Room user, as opposed to, you know, the Dusclopses or the Porygons that previously you'd see on this kind of team composition. So I think that it's so early on, and I wanted to just make this video, one, to actually, like, you know, kind of give you the rules, because when I saw the rule set, I was actually confused on what Pokemon were legal and which ones weren't legal, so I hope that was at least helpful. I hope the reference graphics were helpful, and I also wanted to just give you some general idea of how players are at least approaching this format early on. Once again, this is not close to an exhaustive overview whatsoever, and I will have some, you know, more in-depth breakdowns on maybe specific Pokemon or classes of Pokemon later on, but I wanted to make this video just so that now you have some idea of, like, what are the, you know, 30 Pokemon I should expect to see. Well, if you go to those two slides earlier that cover the old Pokemon and the new Pokemon, that should give you some general idea of things that you will definitely see in battles. That being said, please don't feel forced to use one of those Pokemon. Like I said, once again, it is early on in the metagame, and I think anything can really work in these first couple of weeks. So, you know, try out different things. See what works for you, see what doesn't work for you, and, you know, I hope that through the resources offered through this video, you at least have some idea of what direction to go down under. And if you don't, no worries, there will be a lot more content on this channel to further guide you. So I hope you at least found this introductory video helpful. We will have more high-level stuff moving forward. You know, I didn't want to get too into the nitty-gritty and wanted to just summarize the rules for you. But yeah, hope you found this helpful, and thanks as always for watching. Let me know what you want to see next. Obviously, we're going to be starting Road to Ranked in about a week, so we'll have daily battle videos as always, and that's, you know, kind of the primary focus of this channel. But I always find that with new metagames, there's a lot of opportunity to teach people about stuff outside of just battles. I know live team building is something people express interest in as well, so I might do, you know, for the teams that I do build for Road to Rank, maybe kind of record myself, you know, building the teams and then try to edit them and, you know, get some key takeaways from them. In addition, as if you follow this channel, you know that I really like kind of making these more PowerPoint style presentations. So, you know, I definitely plan on making guides, for example, on the new Pokemon, covering some of the old Pokemon and how maybe they've changed and how you can use them, stuff like that. So whatever you want to see, let me know in the comments below, and please feel free to share with anyone that might be interested in Series 7. So thank you so much as always for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed and found it helpful, and I will catch you next time. Very, very exciting times right now, and I am eager to just start battling as well. So, yeah, until next time, peace.